In this part of our tutorial, we're going to introduce to you float and double arrays in iOS. So we're going to do this again by declaring and initializing an array of floats and an array of doubles. So we're going to first declare it and then we're going to give it some values. And I'm going to show you a little shortcut you can use when declaring arrays. So we're going to talk about when we would use an array of floats or doubles versus maybe an array of integers. And we're going to use the example of a list of bank transactions. So now we've seen Boolean and integer arrays, let's take a look at arrays of floats and arrays of doubles. So just to recap, a float is a decimal number that will display up to 7 digits in Xamarin Studio. So let's call this float, just call it float1, something uninteresting. And let's say it has a value 5.5, and remember we have to include the F right after the decimal number to signify that it's a float, because otherwise our compiler interprets this as a double. Let's create another double. We'll just call this double1, and we'll give it the value of 6.6666666. So this is what a float and a double look like. So these are just single variables. And now let's create some arrays. So let's have a float array. So very similar to before, we have the square brackets just to indicate that it's a float. And we're just going to call this float array. Okay, and very similar to before, we can either initialize it up here, we can say new array of floats and give it a value like 2. Or we can copy this, get rid of that, and assign it in a function. Either way, it's doing exactly the same thing, just declaring the array at different times. So I'm just going to include up here, we have float, so new float, and we're going to say this is 4 values long. Okay. And if we want, we can assign some values to it. So let's go ahead and do that now. So let's say we have 4.4, 3.3, 2.2, see where this is going, and 1.1. So now 4 floats in this array of 4, so we can get rid of that. And again, if we change it to a value that doesn't match what's in here, we get an error. Now, notice how this text is kind of lighter than this text here, although it's the same color. This is because this is actually redundant. What we can do is, this is fine, this is a different size, so this is not incorrect syntax by any means, and if you want to be more specific, this is what you would do. But we could also get rid of this completely, and it's not letting me select and do that, so I'm just going to delete it that way, and this is also fine. So notice no red lines, no funny colors, so we know everything is working fine. It's just this is the, I guess you could say, more proper way of doing it. So I'll just leave that for now. So that's another way you can initialize an array. A little less specific, but also saves a tiny bit of time because you don't have to write out the new and then the float in and then the square brackets. So now let's create an array of doubles. This one I want to create with a real life example in mind. So perhaps we are looking at a bank account and maybe it has a list of transactions. Now the reason I didn't use this example with the integers is that transactions are typically doubles or floats because they have decimal places. In this case I'm going to use doubles just because in Xamarin Studio and in a lot of the C# functions we like to use doubles instead of floats, so why not just stick with what's going to be used more often. So here we'll have a double array, and we're going to call this bank transactions. Okay, and let's initialize it right up here. So again, if we just left it blank, this is just assigning this particular name to this type, but hasn't created it, hasn't populated it with any values or anything. So we're going to do this, and now we're going to give it some values. So we could again either say new, double, and then have our list of values, or we could just not include the new double and just have our list of values. So let's do that. Perhaps we have $500 withdrawal or deposit, and then maybe a $200 withdrawal, and then a 689.32 deposit, and then maybe a 33.76 withdrawal. So this is what it might look like. This is maybe one way that a banking app would represent a list of transactions, is through an array of doubles. And if you really wanted to select a transaction on a specific date, then you could go through that list and just pick out one particular transaction or one particular date. So think about some other examples of where we might see a list of doubles or a list of floats. In this part of our tutorial, we introduced float and double arrays in iOS. So we did that by first creating an array of floats, and then we created an array of doubles, and we named the double array bank transactions, because we're looking at basically a list of transactions, which might be one way that your bank database would store your transactions in an array of doubles. So by now you should be able to create an array of floats or doubles and discuss where we would use an array of doubles or floats versus an array of integers. So this can be either in real life or in your code or someone else's.